Hi, everyone. This is Tori Vandelin with Prevent Connect. This podcast concludes the conversation Ashley Klein Jimenez and I had with Keith Kaufman and Elizabeth Letourneau. They are co authors and collaborators of the guide Preventing and Addressing Child Sexual Abuse in Youth Serving Organizations, a desk guide for organizational leaders. That adaptability you just mentioned, I think, is why we were really excited to do this podcast because it not only helps people adapt prevention strategies, youth serving organization to youth serving organizations. Keith, you mentioned, whether it's the two-person dance studio, the healthcare clinic, or the multi-million billion dollar youth serving organization, national agency, the adaptability of the framework is so crucial right now, and it's crucial as a foundation when we look at, if we've learned anything this year, we have no idea what changes to expect around the corner, as far as the structures of how we socialize, and especially how youth socialize too. What you said about the cell phone use, I'm like, oh wow, like that was something that my parents didn't have to worry about a whole lot with me or my sister. But it's probably something that, maybe my cousin is worried about with his kids, who are much younger. So I think having this framework that, folks can build off of and go back to, kind of have this like cyclical nature with it, and making sure that the goals of safety are at the front, leading with those values of safety in their organizational plans. It really strengthens what people already know about the practices, the policies, the protocols, the trainings that prevent child sexual abuse in youth serving organizations.
Tori, could I add one more thing in that regard?
Yeah, go for it.
So one of the other things that I like about the 8 areas that we have is they create this really nice feedback loop for organizations. So, what we've just been talking about, what we've been talking about for the last 45 or 50 minutes is how to go from a large area, one of the 8 areas, for example, that you as the director of a youth serving organization know you need to address, putting in place different policies and practices that you think are the best match for you. But, you know, I really like the fact that one of our 8 is that idea of building in some evaluation and accountability. So it should always be about this feedback loop. It should always be about that you set out what you think are the best set of best practices that fit your organization, your safety needs, your population, your program. But there really needs to be some way of coming back and taking a look at and having a way to receive feedback that lets you know which are spot on and which really need to be adjusted. And that's something that happens over time. And I think that the better organizations are about creating that feedback loop, the more effective that they can be in terms of keeping youth safe.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I will say one thing that was interesting as we looked at all that the youth serving organizations are doing, and there's so much, is the trainings often focus on training staff and volunteers to identify red flags and concerning behaviors and things that might indicate that abuse is taking place or is imminent or is already taken place. But nobody, I don't think any of the organizations that we work with, and I don't know of any organizations, actually ask kids about their experiences, abuse and otherwise, in the context of their participation in youth serving organizations. Some organizations do surveys for kind of participant satisfaction and other kinds of surveys to get a sense of what are the outcomes of participating in that particular organization. But nobody includes specific questions that ask about sexual abuse or bullying or physical violence or verbal violence. And the single best way to know if that's happening is to ask kids. And the next best way is to ask parents. And so getting some comfort with including questions like that on a routine basis, not only when you suspect something is happening, but just routine, because we often don't know that abuse is happening or is imminent. Of course, it's very secret. I think would be really helpful. And I think it's incumbent upon those of us who are researchers to help develop easy to use and valid and reliable measures that are comfortable for use serving organizations, for kids and for parents, but that give clear information about whether inappropriate, boundary violating, and abuse behaviors are occurring. So that is one place that I'd like to see the field move towards.
That's great, Elizabeth. I mean, I think about not asking those questions and not trying to learn what's going on with youth from youth perspective is one way to kind of keep silence as a norm, right? And to not show that organizationally, you know, we care about this and we know it's a problem. So I love that suggestion to build some comfort around asking those questions of youth to have a better understanding of what might be going on. So
yeah,
Elizabeth,
Ashley,
you mentioned.
Sorry, Ashley, if I can just say, you know, I don't think youth serving organizations want to not know. I think it can be really hard if you're trying to attract kids to your organization and then you're going to bring up questions about sexual abuse. Then parents might say, why, is that a problem? And the community might say, wow, is there a problem here? And so I think it's kind of tricky. It's tricky for organizations to navigate this. And certainly I think if we can get to the place where we've got a short set of valid, you know, good, reliable items that virtually everybody starts using, then that stigma of even asking the question can get reduced and addressed. But I don't think it's that organizations don't want to know. I think it's they don't know how to ask the questions in a way that isn't off-putting or scary. And then of course they also have to know what to do with affirmative responses and have systems in place for that.
And I do know that there are some there are a few examples of organizations that do that. I don't think it's done widely, but I can think of two different organizations, one that asks in terms of verbal interviews with youth, and the other that sends their national sends something out and then gives feedback to the local. But I agree with you. I don't think it's done for most organizations. And it is interesting that you mentioned that, because we also did a project with parents with a prevention program. One of the fears was that parents were going to ask exactly the question you said, Elizabeth, of you know, you're showing me this, why are you showing me this, is there a problem? And the interesting thing is we collected evaluation data, and they were so excited, and they were so excited that they had seen this prevention program that they actually were asking, can you show it to my kids now? So you know, I do think the fear exists from the organizational perspective. I'm not sure that it's well placed based on, you know, that limited information we got, but we did focus groups and we were with the parents, and they were so excited that somebody was actually talking to them about this. So I kind of think that more organizations should be brave, step forward, and actually do it.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks, Elizabeth, for those points. I think they're really well taken. And, you know, absolutely. It's a hard line for organizations to walk, to know that, you know, the safety of their participants and the youth that they serve is of utmost importance. And also, how do we have these conversations when there is so much kind of uncomfortableness, I guess. I don't know if that's a word, but just in terms of talking about sexual abuse in general for many people still. So one thing that I wanted to just pull back on is, Elizabeth, you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that this work is far from complete, that it's something that will be ongoing. And I think you even teased that there may be more things to come. But I'm wondering, in the meantime, if there's any other maybe advice, guidance, or tools and resources for preventing child sexual abuse in youth-serving organizations that you'd like to share with our audience. And we'll be patiently waiting to see what else comes out of the work you all are doing. But I just wanted to open that up to you now.
Well, I can start with one thing that I want to highlight, and then I know Keith is going to know more than I do, but the CDC has a set of guidelines that they issued back in 2007 for protecting children from child sexual abuse within the context of youth-serving organizations. And they are updating those guidelines, and that's a really exciting project. I mentioned that Luciana Simi-Mayton, who works with me at the Moore Center, was critical to this, to developing our leadership desk guide, and she is also consulting on that project. So I'm really excited that there are multiple groups that are really beginning to grapple with how do we take prevention to the next level. And so that's one thing that I would say is going to be forthcoming that I think is exciting.
And I guess I would add to that I'd encourage folks to take a look for our research publication that's a complement to this desk guide. So we already have one that's published, and Tori will get you the title and information about that. And then we have a second one that's coming out. Well, hopefully will be coming out sometime soon that we're working on that offers a little bit of a different perspective in terms of offering a little more specificity of the different strategies that we found were suggested as best practices in the literature, and which ones of those were also being used currently by a small group of large youth-serving organizations. In addition to that, I do think that there's a lot of organizations that are very generous about sharing information, and we can probably provide you with some of the sources that we use to look for best practices. A number of those organizations offer materials as well.
Yeah, I would say the most comprehensive, although not the only one we would recommend, is the Australian Royal Commission into Institutional Abuse Against Children. Australia commissioned a 5-year, $450 million review of abuse that happens in the context of institutional settings against children. And it is far and away the most comprehensive effort to date to really grapple with this issue. And they have published, I think, 27 volumes on that include dozens, maybe hundreds of recommendations. And so it's a pretty deep dive, but there's some excellent summary statements. And Keith has been instrumental, as has Ben Matthews, one of our other partners, and Don Palmer, all of our partners in really providing some of the research briefs that came out of that work.
Well, thank you for providing all of that. We have had such a, this has been just a great conversation, so much nuance, and really looking forward to sharing this with our audience. I just want to appreciate you both and the work that you do and that you've done on this desk guide. Tori, I'm going to pass it over to you for any final comments.
Yeah, thank you both so much for taking time to talk with us today, walking us through this desk guide. It's dense, it's a lot of information, but I feel like this conversation was so important for us to have. So really happy to have you both. Keith, you're absolutely right. I will link to the resources that you all mentioned on the podcast page on our website. So those will be quick clicks for folks who want to dive deeper into this information. But thank you both so much for the work that you've done, the work that you'll continue to do, and for sharing that with us on our podcast today.
Thanks for including us. It was a pleasure to get a chance to share information about the desk guide.
Yeah, it really was. Thanks, Tori and Ashley. This was a lot of fun. And Keith, as always, a real pleasure to get to do anything with you.
Right back at you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Follow along with other Prevent Connect podcasts at preventconnect.org/podcast.